welcome to the stream. Omega Edge, and today we're going to be painting the Blood Angels Lemartes model, which Games Workshop sent me. And the reason we're doing live streaming is, well, for one, I'm actually going back to work. I managed to get a full-time job at a games company called EA, and so that won't leave us much time as I'd like to, I guess, film and create content and like record content as much as I'd like to. But obviously I'll still be doing that. I just also wanted to see if there was a way for me to keep up with my content and try streaming so I can integrate with you guys a bit better. So hopefully we'll see how this goes, and if people like it, thank you. Thank you. If people like it and it does well, then I'll do it more. So here's the model. I've primed him in grey, and I've basically blue tacked his backpack and his helmet because we're going to do those separately. But for the rest, we'll do him in sub-assemblies. Now, the way I sprayed this was wasn't with an airbrush. It was with a spray can, just because it was a bit quicker. And we're going to cover all of this anyway. But what I'd like to take you through today, or tonight rather, depending on where you are, is how to sketch. Now, we've been doing that sort of kind of sketching technique for a little while, and I wanted to show you firsthand and actually talk through it, and then of course you can ask questions depending if there's anything that you need to know or if anything kind of sticks out to you, and I'm obviously here to help and answer those questions for you. So I should have my webcam as well with the palette, which is a new addition as well. So now I can actually record and have my palette, because I know that's been a request from many people in the past too. So the colours I'll be using, and I'll probably on the separate video do like a kind of colour choice decision and like why I'd kind of decided on those colours. And I'm also going to lower the music a little bit because it's quite loud. 1 second. So I'm actually going to go for a warmer tone, and there's a few reasons for that. Today we're just going to be working on the black, but the reason I'm going for a warmer tone is because I want to try and see if I can come up with a kind of black, red ochre, red like pink armor. I have no idea how it's going to look. I'm just interested in it. It's not every day that I get to paint a Blood Angel. So I thought I'd just give it a go, and we can see what kind of comes out. So now before I start, I want to mention that okay, we're going to learn together. I haven't got the answers for everything. We're going to learn together, and we'll just see how it goes as we experiment. However, the reason I'm using Chimera, AK, and Scale 75. So Scale 75 is Eclipse Grey, and then I've got two different greys. We'll just kind of mix between them: Dark Sea Grey and Natural Grey from AK, and Carbon Black, Violet, and Red Ochre from Chimera. And the reason we're using these brands is because, as far as I know, these are the most matte brands out there, with Scale 75 being the most matte. And when we sketch, that actually allows our oil paints to kind of sit comfortably, and we can make better use of them, and it stops them sliding around the surface. So I much prefer to use that in order to in order to paint with and use as an underlayer. But if you don't have that, if you have like a satin paint, so like GW or Vallejo, that should be fine. It's just that I prefer matte paints for those reasons. So what I'm going to do is I'll start by just mixing these colours on my wet palette. So I'm using a wet palette from Redgrass Games, and we'll see how it goes as we start. Okay, so the first thing I'll do is I'll just start preparing the colours on my palette. So we'll start with the Eclipse Grey. I'll keep them separate, maybe take a little bit more. Make sure I've got some water, some fresh water as well. You guys can see if you look on the main screen. Actually, I'll keep it here. There we go. And then we'll use the neutral from AK, and then dark sea grey, which are very similar. One's like more bluish, and one's a bit more red. Ouch! That plastic. It's open. And red ochre, which is like one of my favorite colors. And then carbon black, because we need black, of course. So violet, we're going to use violet because it's colder, and we're just going to use that to help our shadows be a bit more interesting. And what that will do is that when we mix in the red ochre, if this thing next comes out, when we mix in the red ochre, what that will allow us to do is have colder shadows and warmer highlights. And we'll go from there. And I might even take a bit of a lucky white yellow, but we'll see. So let's start with so now I've got these colors. I'm just going to start mixing. Take some water. And the first thing I want to do is just see an experiment and see what colors I actually make from this, and see what kind of mixtures come out from just playing with these colors and seeing what you get. So we get some black in there to kind of reduce the color a bit. But as we go, you'll start to see I kind of get this very desaturated grey brown. And then we'll just take the Eclipse grey, which has a little bit of, just a tiny bit of blue in it. A tiny bit of blue. And then we'll take the violet to make even colder. Get this little brown. See how powerful that violet is, you really don't need a lot. And then we've got 3 different shades of this black. I'm not sure how well this is coming up for you guys, but you get 3 different shades of black here from mixing those colors together. Okay. So what we'll do now is if we switch back to our palette. So for this sketch, I'm going to use my Winsor & Newton size 0. Let's find it in the collection of brushes. There we go. So series 7, Winsor & Newton size 0. And I really like Winsor & Newtons for both acrylics and oils because they really do well at keeping their tip. And they can actually take quite a bit of punishment without losing their tips. So what I'll do is I'll quickly remove the backpack. And we're just going to focus. Let's see if I can zoom in. And hopefully that stays clear. Yeah, cool. So we're just going to focus firstly on this leg and this knee. Now, when we mix our colors, one of the challenges we have, and the reasons we do this in acrylics first, is we want to make sure that we're going in with a plan. If we go in straight with oils, it becomes harder to adjust those colors once they're on, and we actually have to end up restarting or totally wiping our work away. So by starting with an acrylic, what that allows us to do is, due to how fast they dry, not only do we get an advantage of an underlayer for our oils to adhere to, but we also have the advantage of the being able to see our work very quickly and just make adjustments. But this is meant to be very loose and very easy and quick. It's just a sketch to kind of guide us and help us understand our model a bit more and understand what the model needs. So, cool. All right. So let's start. So what I'll do is keep this thing focused. Maybe bring the camera a bit closer. There we go. You can see how like bad this pre-shade is and the kind of texture, but thankfully it's quite thin, so we don't have any like physical texture, but we'll cover that. So what I'm doing is I'm taking a tiny amount, like really small. You can see how little paint is on that brush. And with that, where's my paper towel? Oh. Take some paper towel. So zoom in just a little bit. There you go. So with that, I take just a tiny bit of paint, I wipe it, and then I can just test it. You can't probably see it on my thumb here because of how small it is and how black it is. But what we're going to do from there is we're just going to make a tiny mark. And I'm using this darker color in my shadows. And you can see that I'm not trying to blend or anything like that. I'm just layering using the tip of my brush, and I'm making tiny brush marks. I'll leave this water over here so I don't hit the camera. Hopefully you guys can see okay. I'm just using this to sketch out where my shadows are. And we can be as rough with this as we want. So we're just focusing on this knee at the moment. Let's get that focus. There you go. So if you guys remember our volumes, Space Marines are pretty easy to paint just because they're broken down into like tubes and spheres. So his knee pad, if we had to look at it in which of the 3D shapes it would fall under a sphere. So I'm having the light direction come at the model like this. So pretty much where I've done the lighting, where you can see where the highlight is, the zenithal is, I'm going to have it coming down from probably about a 45-degree angle from his left-hand side, like that. And so we're going to have his face lit a lot. And as we go down through the model, the bottom half becomes more desaturated and uses less color, whereas the upper half will use more color and more saturation and an increase in value, because that's where we want the focus to be drawn to. So if you'll notice when I mix my colors, I'm not really using much of this red or at all. I'm kind of sticking to the darker area of my palette. And then we can do the same thing with the side of the foot, just down here, just making those tiny marks. And I think at this stage, it will seem like really like superfluous to kind of do this, but as the painting starts to develop, it will start to make more sense. So one of the ways I can use the desaturation is actually just using more of the normal neutral black, the carbon black, so just having less of the purple in there. And because I'm starting from a grey surface, this actually allows the colours to come out a bit more. So it kind of gives us more information, a better starting place, a starting point. Okay. Thank you for joining, by the way, guys. I do appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules to come sit with me. Hopefully, you'll find this helpful and useful towards the end as we develop. Just doing the same thing. I'm just following the volumes from my pre-shade, trying to keep my marks as small as possible. And don't worry too much if you go over the details. Lemartes is like quite a nice model, but he doesn't have that many spaces to kind of rest. There's always like some extra object. So this kind of cross mark, because he's with the Death Company, hatch across his leg, even his chest, being a chaplain, just has these lines. But yeah, we'll probably do that in non-metallic metal, and I'll walk through that at some point. And maybe in another episode for today, or just for tonight, we'll just focus on this part of the black. So, really simple, getting in that shade, just using a little bit of the paint. Trying to keep my marks thin, letting the paint dry. That's one of the tricky things with acrylics, is just knowing the consistency. So I'm just mixing a tiny bit of water to paint. It's hard to say like a ratio. You'll kind of learn as you go. But what you don't want is thick paint. Not on a model this size. When we get to like busts, for example, we can use slightly thicker paint because there's more surface area for the paint to kind of go across. But for a model like this, you don't want as much. Okay, so now I'm kind of going up in value, and I'm using that kind of more of our mid-tone, and this is a lighter kind of greyish colour, and we're just going to sketch that on top of the other area where I've kind of left a kind of white gap. And what I'm doing with this, even though it's taking a little while to develop, is I'm creating like marks, kind of like a hash mark across the whole model. And we're kind of slowly moving out. I'm just going to turn off this light in my background, guys. 1 second. Yeah, so I've just turned off that light just so you guys can make out the colour a bit more. I had my bedroom light on, and it's kind of interrupting the look. So you can see just about we've got that kind of grey, pretty ugly at the moment. I've noticed that like in general, depending on what you're doing, your model will stay, I think in oils the model stays in the ugly phase for quite a while. Before it actually gets to a point where it's presentable, and that's something that you actually want to share out. So here you'll notice that I've gone back to my darker colour, and that's because this let's rinse that so it isn't dry, but that's because this area here on the foot, keep that, yeah, there you go, this area here is facing downwards. So if you look at it like a shape, a plane, it's facing towards the floor. So that's why I'm using a lower value here. And what that does is it helps us create a bit more information and also a bit more contrast, which just helps our eyes make out shapes and define shapes easier. So if we didn't have that, all of this would kind of blend into one and it would be more difficult to read. I'm just going slightly back up now, so now we've done that, we can go slightly back up, and this is where we start making use of that brown colour, that reddish brown. It's always a good habit to let the model dry just a little bit, especially for acrylics, because they tend to dry slightly lighter than when you first applied it. So it does take a few seconds for it to kind of adjust to what you need. Well, I feel the same about my models. My models, like, even Exodus, which I did more recently, oh my. It felt like ages before that model actually went to the phase I needed it to be. Before it actually came out of the ugly phase. But no, like, you just have to keep working at it. It does take a bit of time, but you just keep working at it and you'll start to see slowly it will begin to develop. But you just need the mindset. Like, painting is supposed to be fun, and an exercise in learning really about yourself as well. Like, how do you respond to challenges? Do you get discouraged quite easily? I think it is easy to become a bit discouraged, especially with access to social media. Like, you look at social media and it can, if you're not careful, you can fall into a trap of comparison. So you've got to be careful. I think I've mentioned that sort of stuff. But everyone goes through it. I definitely go through it often. And I have to take moments to just kind of like think about like what's important. So similar here, doing the same thing on the edges. And now we've got a bit more definition, just due to that these little areas, these little marks we made on the side. And that's why I think it's actually very important to have a sharp brush. Like, I've seen some other painters, particularly oil painters, using very thick, blotchy brushes, and yeah, I think it kind of can cause the model to look quite almost like soft, because everything's blended, but then also you start to develop a texture. So I'm really like opposed to, you know, we should be kind of following the same techniques that we see acrylic painters kind of do. There's no reason really for us to change up too much. Like, we can still use thin paint, and then it dries faster as well, so you actually get more time out of your sessions. You get more out of your sessions rather than, I guess, waiting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reserve certain colors, like I mentioned at the start, for certain areas of the model. So for example, here you can just see the leg is starting to develop. You have got a slight value change, but I wouldn't say at this point it really looks black. Like, I would actually say it looks closer to grey, but that's fine, because at this stage all we're trying to do is like define those values, and like, again, it's just a sketch. We will go in again with oil paints afterwards to really enhance everything and bring it all together, so it's like a helpful phase. I basically use acrylics these days as my sketching tool to help plan out my work, and then I go in with oils to do what I call the real painting. And it's just a quick way of helping you. Right, so I'll quickly do one more layer on that leg, just using the slightly upper grey, just in the areas here, really bringing it together. It's kind of reminds a bit of a Space Wolf, like that kind of Space Wolf grey, classic Space Wolf grey from Heresy or something. There you go. And what we're doing is we're creating that light volume, but keeping it very flat. Just creating that shadow back in. You'll find that, at least in this way of painting, let's get the black, a little bit more black. You'll find in this way of painting, the paints kind of start to look a bit chalky, which is fine. Again, oil paints will refine all of that out. Right, so coming on to this knee now. This is where it gets a bit more complicated, but again, once you understand the shape, the mark we need to make should follow the curvature of the shape that it's on. So if this was flat like we had with the leg there, we could do these like hash marks or stippling. And we can still do the same thing with the knee pad here. However, the mark we make, if I just show you on my hand, the mark we make, with some water, should be following the shape. So everything, taking your brush, just follow the shape, follow the curvature. So we're actually drawing in the colours and marks that we need. Oh, question? For some reason, give me a second because the video doesn't seem to update the questions at the same time. I'm looking at my phone. Acrylic. Why did I go from acrylics to oils? So I think, like, okay, so this has been an interesting question. It's a good question, because I think I went through stages. I wanted to try to see what oil paints could do originally, because I hadn't really seen them used for painting miniatures. But in contemporary art, or just like even classical art, obviously acrylics went around, but today, even today's art, people still use oil paints. So I was like, well, okay, why is that not being used for miniatures then? And then obviously I realized about the slow drying time. But I found that I was actually able to mix colors and blend colors a lot easier with oils. A trick actually for you guys, something I'll mention. So here's like a cool tip that I'll probably go into at some point. You might already know if you've watched the other videos. It's that water mixable oil paints are totally compatible with acrylics. Now, depending on the amount you use. So when I first started, I only got water mixable oils, and I was using these with my acrylic paints as a kind of test to see if I would go towards full oils. And I just found that the colors were so much stronger and so much more vibrant when I was using oils as opposed to acrylics. My acrylics came out quite chalky, and I don't know, like synthetic. They are obviously synthetic, but as a result, I just kind of found them looking, yeah, chalky, I guess is the word. Just very like uninspired is the word. I've seen some beautiful acrylic models, don't get me wrong, but when I used an oil paint on top of that, everything just went pow, like blam. Everything was more vibrant. And what I'll do, in fact, give me 2 seconds, I'll show you something. This is a model that I did like over a year ago now, and like it was one of my first experiments with that new oil paint technique I developed called prime glazing. And like when I would put this next to my acrylic models and other people's acrylic models, I could see it from a distance. It was just really strong, really powerful. And the model we're kind of working on in a moment, I mean, you can even see how the light struggles with that one. Let's see if I can just zoom in. There you go. So when I was doing this in acrylics, I found that the kind of sketch was like, oh, pretty gross. And that's me just learning how to sketch like in a better way. But as soon as I put on the oil paint, everything kind of popped up, and I just really brought harmony and made things look more beautiful. So the colours, even colours on the arms, on the chest. The hoodie is done in acrylics, so I haven't actually got to painting that in oils yet. But just for this face and skin, I just found it to be so much more like vibrant and stronger. So yeah, I think oils just have their advantages that acrylics can't really compete with. Even the artist grade acrylics can't compete with oil paint. And I think the reason why people struggle with oil paint is mainly just because it seems like it's got a steeper learning curve, but in actual fact, it's probably easier than it's probably easier than yeah, acrylics. Are there any downsides to water mixables? Not really. They dry faster than normal oils. Okay, that's not true. The only downside is that you don't have, at least in this brand, there are other brands out there that I haven't had a chance to try yet, but at least in Winsor Newton, you don't get a lot of opaque oil paints. But that's fine, because when I do my Alpha Legion, I actually just take this color, blue violet, and where's my other blue? Tiny bit of French ultramarine, a tiny bit. I mix that together, and that's how I get my blue color scheme. And the opacity, this is very opaque, this paint, so it kind of counteracts, but this color makes it more vibrant. So I really use, because obviously it's a transparent pigment, so I really use my oil paints for just adding that vibrancy and extra color and saturation that acrylics just can't provide. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that answers the question. Yeah, I'd be like, yeah, I mean, maybe I can do a quick tutorial on it and explain it in a bit more detail too, to help you guys. But we'll see as time goes on. So right now I'm just gonna work on this knee pad and just get that shape. Get that shape to be a bit more. And you can actually see where it's not blended out at all, which is fine. Like, we want there to be this kind of gradient. You should be able to see the gradient, but that's fine, because we can remove that at a later date with the oil paints. And you'll start to see. So you just make these marks. Again, don't worry that too much that it doesn't really look black at the moment. That's absolutely fine, because we'll refine that in the next phases. You can still add in a deeper shadow just to help it along though. Now, I think I'm going to kind of do this armor a bit shiny. So what I'll do is, in order to make something look shiny, we need to decrease the spread or the volume of our beam of light, of our focus light. So if something's very close, the beam will be smaller. If something's further away, it'll be wider. But for this, I really want this to look like kind of polished armor. So with maybe some dust on it, but we can make that darker just before the bottom, and what that will give us is a kind of rebound light. That is how we can make the armor look brighter, and we can do that. We can sketch that in afterwards, which is kind of like bounce light. It needs to be slightly lighter than the shadow, but not any brighter than the highlight. And this doesn't need to be perfect. Just enough to guide you through. And we've obviously got a shadow here, so I'm just going to mark that. We will have a slight bounce reflection, but we can do that afterwards, once we've got the shape, the form in. I'll just do a quick lining. Notice how slow my stroke is, because I'm trying not to interrupt. We can be fast, but the slower we go, the less texture will develop, because we're not like slicing the paint in any way, and we're also giving it a bit more chance to kind of solidify. Okay. this red mark. I think in honest fact, this is probably, yeah, probably a bit too red. I mean, I can probably get a colour in there. Let's see what I got. Probably use sunny skin tone, but I'm actually going to use grimy grey because it's like a very, very light grey. Ooh, too much. Oh well. And I'm going to move my nicely almost finished, almost painted models away so I don't accidentally paint on top of them. Take this colour. And I'm just going to take a little bit of that and mix that in, and that will just kind of this bone colour. You can see what that does. Remember, if you mix a white into a darker colour, the darker colour will basically dominate, will become more powerful. But if you do the opposite way, if you want to make something brighter, then you mix the colour into the brighter colour. So you mix this colour, the darker colour, into the white, will give you a more higher value version of that colour. The reverse will give you a lower version of that colour. Don't ask me why. I don't know why. It just seems to be the way what happens when you colour mix. So now I'm just marking, just doing a quick stippling motion. And stippling is useful because it kind of gives us that freedom made from all these tiny dots, and that's actually why you need a sharp brush. Tiny amount of paint on the edge as well. I'm going to see if we can make it into zoom in for you guys. Now, the answer here to kind of unify all of this would be to do a glaze if you were going to do it in acrylics, but we're not. We want this in, we're going to save all of this for the oil area. I think, unfortunately, when I built this, I've got some glue in that gap. It's kind of messed up the foot. Oh well. Now I'm just making some rebound lights, some deep areas of deeper shadow to go along, make the armor seem a bit more reflective. Again, all of this is just a guide. We'll probably go over all of this anyway in oil paints, but at least it gives us a bit more information. We'll end up getting a slightly warmer version of our black. But we could do really crazy with this, to be honest. We could put like lots of colours across this black to make it a bit more interesting. And here I'm just taking a little bit of that red. Stipple. Really tiny marks. Then we'll get the purple in there to act as the reflective underlight. You can see it there now. Starts to make that red bounce up a bit more. We want it to be more desaturated so that we're not bringing too much attention down here, because it is only the knee, so but it's just an easy shape to start on. Now in person, that already looks like quite a bit deeper. Yeah. You got to darken the. It just takes a little bit to develop, but you're getting this more interesting marks this way. Now we could also like go up and mark all of this up with the acrylic, like a just sketch over it, just make a bit of texture. To go for more painterly style. But the key thing is just establishing the volume. Now this knee, or this thigh, that is in more light, similar to the knee pad. So that would receive a similar amount, but again, our focus will be up here. So the cool thing, if we look at, where's the box art gone? Where's the package? It's vanished. It has fled from me. I've lost it. It's gone. It's gone for good. Somewhere. If you remember the box art, we've got bone on his face and on his shoulder pad here. And then this area is in bright red. The reason why I haven't done red down here is because that would detract, right? We want our focus to be up here, not down here. We don't want our focus to be down here, not really. There's already a lot of like distracting items that will be non-metallic metal anyway, but our focus will need to be up here. So like the cool stuff, the emblem, the skull, skull chest, all of it is in this torso area. So when we get onto this thigh, which we're going to come into now, we want it to be bright because it's like a leg that's facing forward, or it's the part of the leg that's facing upwards towards the sunlight. But also, we really want this area to be where our viewers look and where their attention goes to. Yeah. Any questions on that, guys? If you have any, feel free, and I'll just keep painting away. Yeah, I think you are still muted. I'm sorry about that. I'll see if I can figure out a way so that you guys can just jump in when you want. It might be because when I made this event, I'd actually opened it up to the wider public as well. So I didn't want. I was kind of concerned that maybe we'd get some people on. I just didn't want people to be disrupted. So it could be that it's just allowed anyone in to. It's kind of silenced everyone as a result. So I'll fix that for the next one. But I've got to say, this is a lot more fun than simply talking to a screen or watching the video back. It's nice to... Yeah, I think I prefer live streaming, to be honest, because a lot of the time I'll sit down and I want to paint, but I have to also bear in mind that you guys need to see this too. So it can slow down like the process of me getting things out to you guys, not because of you guys, but because I want to share it. So I know I'll need to make a video, so I need to be in the headspace to get things out. So I'm trying to remove the kind of blocks to doing that as much as possible. So you'll notice here that I've used a kind of wider volume, and you know, if it is too wide, don't worry, it's better to go wider because then we can always reduce it. Let's see if I can. I can't. Can you zoom in? So we can always reduce it. Also, the key thing is something that I've not mentioned before, but something I've been doing a lot more recently is the use of cast shadows. So with cast shadows, yeah, making videos is time consuming. So like it will take me about 5 hours to make one video. And that's without me like using my face and stuff, which I love though. I love teaching. I really love knowledge sharing and talking to you guys. It's just that I want to be able to get things out sooner and share that with you more. So even though the actual, I mean, if you guys are on the sleeper agent, which I think is the only tip, well, it is the only tip I've made at the moment, it doesn't say anything about video content, but I've just wanted to do that simply because I want to share. So going into cast shadows, Lemartes knee pads, if we're looking at the light here, this area, everything behind here would be in shadow. So your reaction might be to like go here and really keep the same value, but we can't do that because it's not in the same value, it's in a shadow. So to do that, we can look at the model under direct light and see what it does. It kind of does it for you, but we can be a bit more creative, and in a way the spray has blocked it out for us. So we just need to be neat here. No. And we can create our own cast shadow. And you'll notice that when we do stuff like this, it really brings the model to life. I tried doing this on Exodus, and upon further it's kind of blocked by his gun, sorry. Upon further observation, I think I can do it a bit more on that, so I probably will. But here I'm just showing you one way you can use it. Now, the reason why it's more sharp, why the edge is sharper, is because the shadow is being cast on an object that is very close. If you guys, the next time the sun's out, if you're in England, probably won't be for a while, but the next time the sun's out, you'll look at, or an object, even if you turn the light on in your room, you'll notice that the further away the object is, the more faded the light becomes, or the more faded the shadow becomes. So the closer it is, the sharper edge you'll have, which just, yeah, this makes sense, right? So for that, because it's so close, we want a sharper edge, almost like a cut has been done. There you go. And yeah, it might seem quite rough, but that's fine. That's absolutely fine for now. So here, I'm just going to continue just making those marks. I'm following the shape again. So I'm heading downwards with my brush strokes. This one is another cast shadow. We're going to put that into the ditch. There, you don't have to be perfect. And I think the volume that I made is probably a bit too wide, so I'm just going to go in with the darker grey. Start reducing that a little bit. You can see how tiny my strokes are. From a distance, you see how it kind of starts to blend in, get really close up, and you can see the roughness. But again, from a distance, I mean, most people will be looking at it from this distance anyway, so it's not too much of a problem. Okay. And then if we do need to adjust it afterwards, we've got the ability to do that just because we've worked up in such thin layers. So I'll go to this slightly brighter version of the cover, using tiny brush strokes. There we go. And so for the other areas like the groin, similar thing. This area is in more shadow because it's facing away from our light, and we're kind of using that zenithal that I did as a guide. And you know, it's not the most interesting area. We don't really want people to be looking at too much at the groin, so we won't put too much attention to it, but we'll just colour it and add texture. A key thing to do for all of your shadows is just to add some kind of texture. It's particularly when we get onto more display painting and when we get onto our bust, for those areas, the areas in shadow, texture becomes more and more important. Not physical texture like marked texture that you make with your brush. Just working our way through the model again. The temptation might be to brighten all of this up, but that's not what we want to do. We want to keep it, again, lower value. And I'm just going to correct this area here. I think this is where the super glue got caught in the edge. Making that weird shape. Okay. So pretty much at this point, sort of the same thing. So feel free to kind of ping me and ask me some questions as I'm painting. Oh no, made a mark. But yeah, like it's just for this area until we get onto the upper area. It's kind of the same stuff repeated again. So that's the thing about Space Marine models, is that they're just literally the same almost all over. So we have to be kind of imaginative about how we use how we paint over it. Yep. Give me 2 seconds, guys. I'm going to get the charger for my other phone. Died midway through that phone, which has all the questions. Alright, we're back. Okay. No, you can go. No, they're not on camera, so it's fine. It's just hair's on camera. Cool. Okay, we're back. Thanks guys for your patience. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just paint away now on the rest. The back of the leg is similar, but basically we're going to use, for this lighting coming from this way, let's keep that on top. For this lighting coming on this direction, the value will be higher here in these areas. Here we can play a little bit, so we can actually make another mixture for the darker side. And actually maybe that's something worth going over. So if I take my palette again, hopefully you guys can see the other colours I'll make. If I move that. Cool. Yeah, just let me know if you can't see, and I'll just shift the camera around for you. Okay, so using the violet now, this will become we'll make a similar mixture that we've got here. That's starting to separate. So you can see now that I'm kind of going up towards more purple. Maybe it's a bit too quick. Keep it a bit. Here we go. So we're using the same mixtures, but we're using a different base rather than this warmer base here. And then we can still use the grey here. So why are we doing this? Well, one, it's just a temperature change, and it helps like make the back a bit more interesting. But also, it brings our focus when we rotate. It brings our focus and helps the viewer understand that they're in a different. They're looking at it from a different angle. And realistically, if this was a painting, everything would just be painted at this angle, so the whole frame would just be like this, and I'd be painting everything like that, but just turning it around gives us a chance to make it a bit more interesting and for us to try something different. So I'll go to the back of the leg. Painting the back always ends up being I guess less interesting, but you end up doing a better job because you've had practice on the front. For me, at least, anyway. So just getting those marks in. Oh, thin my paint just a little bit. Get a bit of water. And what we're kind of getting is this violet. Using that as a shadow. So this is actually using a temperature, something called a temperature contrast, and you'll find that the guys in Craftwell Studios, they do this sort of thing a lot, where they use temperature colors with different values, and that's how they get this really interesting mixture of, like, you can see something super colorful, but they're using like blues and greens and shadows and reds in the highlight. But that comes with like a really strong understanding of color harmony, which they've developed through like years of using and making that style. But it's definitely something we could explore at a later date as well. See how quickly that's drying, which is really nice. We've kind of got this purpley black at the back. Let's get a bit more. Maybe with this Eclipse grey. Do it from the other side. So the key thing is just working with this is in value. Now I'm going to show you guys a trick that you can use, and it's a really helpful way that I think I like to do when I paint. Is I just take my phone midway through when I'm painting, and let's see, quickly unlock my camera, go to camera. Now if you're using, depending on what you're using, if you're using an iPhone, you can quickly go to like the I guess it's called like the filter, and you can just check the values. You can see like here everything kind of looks the same, but we bring it under this light on this camera. Just zoom in. Oh, is that going to work? There you go. Not helpful. One sec. There we go. Oh. And we get this different value. The camera's very dusty. There we go. Zoom in. Oh, poof. You can see where the different values are. So kind of blurry on camera, trying to make it focus here, but basically that's what I do. And you can actually do the same thing for your palette as well. Let's see if I can just bring this up. that here, and then zoom out. And you can. This is actually how you tell what your colors are. What's using a different value as opposed to another thing. So you can see here we are getting darker here and going brighter, and the opposite here. So it's actually like a really effective way when you're painting to see if like your values work or if you're doing things in the wrong order. As long as your values work, you can use pretty much any color, and then it becomes about understanding color harmony. But that's like a useful trick I use to help guide me in like making sure I'm working with the right values, other than just training your eye essentially. All right. Marking in these areas. Same with the under part of the leg facing downwards, so lower value, receiving less light, but it's not completely pitch black because it's receiving some light, just not as much as the raised areas. You still need to color it to a degree. Just going to bring all of that value down just a little bit so that it's not competing. This is something you'll do as like you start adding in other colors and different areas. The black will start to make a bit more sense. You kind of need to blocking the other colors around it, the other like materials around it, to make sense of it really. But yeah, right now just focus on erasing all of the kind of primer grey that we've developed. Just making sense of the model, understanding what's in there, and let's get a bit closer. There we go. Okay. Cool. Yeah, I will. I'll upload this later. I'll explain. But the trick is really useful just basically for helping you understand values. If you've got a phone that has like a filter on it, you can change it to monotone and basically use that as a guide to help you understand what values you're working with out of the paint selection you've got, what's actually bright, because sometimes you'll think, oh okay, that's definitely darker than the color next to it, and then you turn that on and it reveals that actually they're either the same value, so you're not actually getting that much difference, and your colors will end up looking, well, a bit flat or rather flat and uninspired. So it's actually a good idea to make sure that your values are pretty much where they need to be, and as long as they are, as long as your values are in the right place, you'll find that your paintings work, at least from, maybe not from like a technical point of like neatness until you like develop that area, but definitely from helping the viewer to understand and break up the shapes. That's why it's really important that we don't blend everything, that we keep some areas like just as marks. I think not everything needs to be blended. In my opinion, it's actually a good idea to keep some areas just harsh. It helps you as a viewer make sense of the forms and the shape of the model that's been created. So let's do that rebound light on the side of the groin area. So the light's reflecting from this other space. Not too much. Trouble with acrylics is that you have to go into water so often because of how quickly they dry. And notice, like, it's not neat. Like, I'm not focused on being neat. I'm just focused on getting the volumes, and it's much more important to get your volumes down and just make sure there's no physical texture than there is in being neat. At this stage, we want to be as precise as we can, but it's not the main focus. So super basic at this stage. Now what I'll do is I'll switch over to an oil paint, and you'll see, we'll just focus on this leg, and you'll see how it changes across the whole model. So give me 2 seconds. So basically, using the darker greys will make a mixture between these three. So if I just zoom out a bit, there you go, so you guys can actually see what's going on. So these equivalents, all the color matching, basically will make a mixture between the acrylics we've used before. So to make the kind of eclipse grey, darker grey, and the black, we'll be using ivory black and the Portland grey from Gamblin. And for the violet, we've got the Oxidant purple from Winsor Newton, Naples yellow, which is similar to this grimy grey, which is a bit more desaturated. This is very saturated. This is a lot more like a ice yellow than the grimy grey, but they're not too far apart in terms of like where they sit. And then these two are pretty much just the same colour. I think the Indian red is more vibrant and stronger colour. So we'll just make use of those, and then I'll show you exactly what you need and how you can make the colours on the palette here. So getting the black out, the ivory black. Now ivory black is semi-opaque. It's not an opaque colour. For that you'll need Mars black, which I just don't have at the moment. But the Portland grey is opaque, if I can open it. Slightly more blue. Closer to like the which colour was that? The dark sea grey. I would say these two are very similar in terms of like colour and hue. So, but what we can do is we can just make our mixtures. So I'll just take a scoop of the grey, a scoop of the black. I'm just using my palette knife. You don't have to use a palette knife. You can use a brush. I like the palette knife just because it kind of gives me this fixed texture to take from. So we can easily quickly make those colours, and then we can take a little bit of the Indian red just to warm it, using the red from it just to warm the colour, and a little bit of the yellow Naples, just a tiny bit. And then you can see, if you use those colours, you warm the grey. And this creates like a really nice hue texture. Really nice difference to the hue. And then you can just deepen it down again. Now ivory black is it's quite a blue black. So again, just taking the Indian red to warm that up just a bit. Well, that was a lot actually. Take a little bit more. And at this point, yeah, that's closer to the kind of middle that we wanted from our black, so that's good. So I can use that colour now and put it to the side. So then we've got our kind of hue our mixture there. And then for the next part, let's quickly take this, wipe our palette knife, and then using this one over here, we can pick up some more. It's a bit more black. Don't be too worried about using the colours. Like, you can always get more from the tube. If you don't have exactly what you need, you can always get more. There you go. So this kind of creates that deeper black. Where should I put this? I'll put this here. There you go. Cool. And then you've got the black, and then you can also use a tiny bit of the purple. Now these colours are very low value, but you can see how powerful that purple is. It just changes the temperature. So powerful that you really don't need a lot. And then we just keep making these adjustments basically. Just there to make a slightly lighter version. Maybe a little bit more to warm it. And to neutralize it again to grey. Don't have to get the exact same mixtures. It helps if you do, if you can, but don't worry if you can't. And I'll just use this as the highlight. You can see. And the key thing about this is keeping our paint thick. That's what will stop it from drying out. The thinner you make it, adding that thinner will dry colours out. So I'm just going to clean the palette a little bit, clean around. There we go. It's messy, this job. So make sure you're not wearing nice clothes because it will ruin it. And if you're like me, your wife will kick your butt, or husband. Okay, cool. So we've got our mixtures now. I can probably add just a tiny bit more. I can also add some white if I really wanted to, but I'm just going to try and using the colours we've already got on our palette and making the most out of those. But that is pretty much a colour mix, a colour match. That is pretty much a colour match for what we need on our miniature. So I'll move this over here. Oh, goodbye. Make sure that you guys can see. Okay. Oh, put my finger right in the paint. Any questions on that? On that part? You guys need anything? Any questions just on that mixture and on mixing in general? If not, I'll kick off. Where is my white spirit? Okay. So now because we're using oils, we're going to use white spirit. I really use a very small amount. In fact, I only use what I can put inside these mixing like bowls, I suppose. Someone's singing outside, lovely. And the reason for that is because we don't it's quite toxic. Oil paints themselves are not toxic at all, only if you eat them. So don't do that. But it's the thinner that is the issue for breathing and health. So just be careful when using the thinner. Right. Put on some music. Now we can use the exact same brush. We also have a dry brush here, which will allow us to. Seems I've misplaced my multimeter. It's disappeared into the wall. So I've got a dry brush here. We probably won't need this. But the reason I've got it is just because it allows me to smooth out blending brush strokes. But we are trying to, this is from Da Vinci, but what we're trying to do is use one brush and really kind of add definition through without blending, and this kind of gives us the expressive style, but also it allows us to be a bit more like creative, and we're not erasing the work we do. Every single time we blend, we're actually removing our marks and removing the hard work we've kind of put in. So it's actually a benefit to not blend if you can, and just use your strokes, just exactly the same as you would do in an acrylic. I found my brush. Alright, so now we'll go in. So just taking a tiny bit, so what right now we're going to do is we're going to focus on this dark area, and you'll just see the difference this makes. I take a tiny bit of this thicker paint from our mixture, so I'm going to come down here into this area, and then a tiny bit of thinner. You really don't need a lot. Mix that in, and here I just go into, excuse me, the area and you'll start to see, I think I'm going to use this one, this mixture. You'll start to see how that kind of adds saturation. Rather, we want less saturation down here, but an increase in value. Hopefully that's clear for you guys. Just be gentle. The nice thing about using oils is that we get more longevity out of our paint. Kind of sticks around for longer. Just need to be gentle. So the brush strokes I'm using are just like following the curve of the miniature itself, and we're actually just going in and reinforcing those shadows. So I'm using that kind of purple shadow we used before, just thinning it a tiny bit more than we would if we were working on a bust, for example, but not too much, just so we can help the paint flow easier. You can see that depth. The nice thing about oils is that what we apply on is exactly how it will dry when we come on to doing the full figure. Like, what you see is what you get, unlike in acrylics where they tend to dry a bit lighter. Oils dry exactly as they look when they've actually been applied. Let's make sure the light is where you need. And we can come in to a slightly brighter mark. Just following the sketch. Basically, we're just filling in exactly the sketches. Don't be afraid to add more paint or more of a brighter colour if you need to. Again, this is like lower down across the model, so it doesn't need to be as bright as when we use for the higher areas. The hierarchy for this area is lower because it's just a foot, right? It's just a leg and foot, so we don't want it to be as bright as towards the higher area. There we go. So keep it in focus. Just making sure that the paint is thinned enough so that you have an easier time applying it on top. And that gives us our marks. So we could blend this if we really wanted to smooth the transition, but we can always come back to that afterwards and just tidy it up. But what we have done is we've lost some of that colour, so we can just add that back again using this more red mixture from the Indian red. Just add that back into our colour. Let's go from there. Now when this dries, it will dry more matte because we're using that thinner, but for the most part it will look pretty like shiny and glossy, and it might be difficult to read, but as it starts to dry off, yeah, it will become more matte, which is nice, so you'll be able to see the information you've put down. Just work on this side now. Hard to see with his hands in the way. So coming up to the knee now. The knee now. Same thing, following the shape, following the curve, short brush strokes. In essence, it's almost like you're painting the model twice, but you're just using this as a kind of a way to refine what we've done previously. You do want to try and be as neat as you can. Don't worry if you do make a mistake like I just did there, you can always go over that. But the less is more. The less mistakes you make, the easier it will be to correct later on, so do take your time. Take a little bit of that. Need a tiny bit more grey, just because this is a lighter value. Taking a bit more of the Naples. There we go. Spell. So we really don't need a lot of paint. These like mixtures I can just put away and freeze, or I can use them later. I like to put my oil paints in the freezer just to stop it from drying out and oxidizing, using an airtight jar. So that's too red, there you go, or rather too cold. Need a bit more. That's more like it. Yeah, it's a bit more like it. And now we'll just mark those areas that we used before with this brush. And start refining all of the areas we traced before. You can see how we're starting to soften the circle that we created before. So hopefully this is making sense. Yeah, I'm definitely recording. I do not want that to happen again. You can start to see how just by using it as a guide, and we can move the shape if we kind of went too far or not far enough before. We can actually move that shape around. So here, for example, we can still do a stipple, but it's just less so. Don't need to go as far because we're already using the underpainting underneath to guide us. You can see I'm just dabbing it and just following the shape. So just creating tons and tons of tiny stipples. And the reason why this is working than if we just used oils is because the acrylics are actually helping us. It's actually helping it dry much faster, the surface. There you go. So now, like, yeah, we're starting to get that shape. Now, to be honest, I could go darker, and I probably will actually, just to adjust that, just to make it look more black, because it's still reading to me as like really like a dark grey. A glaze will help with that. We could just glaze black, or the kind of deeper black here that we've got, but that will end up interrupting the work we've done just because the oil is still drying. So we can just kind of go in and reduce these volumes down. So we can just reduce them so that they look a bit darker. Make sure you've got a bit of thinner. You can actually notice how like that paint is pretty much like not moving at all. So I'm just going to reduce our lines. There we go. Make it a bit more focused. Getting those shapes in so that it reads less as like a dark grey. Using the reds as a way to kind of warm up. Like, it's actually quite a nice experiment using this like brownish reds, just to see what we get. See what that kind of gives us, what that creates. And we're just using our marks. Let's make that slightly darker. Here we go. We'll start reducing that volume, and now we'll start to read this black a bit more. I'm going to take this lower value here. A little bit of thinner again. As long as you're gentle, this won't damage your brushes. This will be quite gentle to the brushes. There you go. Look. Starting to get this like kind of pinkish red. Pinkish black, which I think will work really nice with the red of the shoulder pad. Will make it kind of pop and everything is in harmony, because we're reusing these colours throughout the whole of the armour. It's going to extend the shadow so that it's in line. So maybe a tiny bit more. This is more of the purple, so we're using that purple black in order to help our other shadows, our highlights rather, bounce forward. You can see how easily that goes on. It looks like it's pretty much not doing anything, but once it dries, you'll see the effect it has. And again, if you do make a mistake like I did just there, where's that brush? Brush is always hiding. There you go. You can just take your blending brush and just smooth it out, erase it. It's almost like our blending brush is almost like an eraser, so we have to kind of go back over that area again, but at least then it doesn't mean that we're like accidentally staining the surface. We do adjust it a little bit, but not enough to totally decimate the work we were doing. Let's get the mark there. There we go. So now you can see on the leg, we've started to kind of like refine out those marks, and we can make it brighter, but I won't do that. I'm not going to do that until I've done the rest of the mini, so I have a better idea. So like if I was to do it now, I could push it too far, and that would undo the focus that we've got here. That's a mistake I've made in the past, where I've kind of tried to build this up a lot. You can do that if you know exactly what you're going to get at this top section and other areas of the model, but right now I don't think we're there yet. I think we still need to figure out how the rest of the model will work together. But the last thing I'll do, because it is getting a bit late now, is I'll just refine this phi like we did before, and I'll just show you what you can do here. So just getting in that shadow. I think I'm just going to use a little bit more of this black. There we go, that's what I want. Trying to remove the excess paint. The nice thing is that we really don't need to go into thinner much unless we're changing colour. I do like the matte effect that the colour has, but we'll build back up to that as it dries. So we're getting this warmer red, it's kind of pinkish black, and then we're just going in. See if you guys can see. I'll zoom out again. There you go. The nice thing about this is that we actually end up still maintaining the light area, but it just smooths it. And I, at least in my hand, like I think on the camera, from what I'm seeing and I'm looking, doesn't look that bright, but in the hand for some reason, it could just be my camera to be fair, but in the hand it really does make the model kind of jump and pop a lot more. Just adding in these oils on top. I think, and also we don't have to go over all of the acrylic. If it's there, we kind of can leave it as it is. It's only if we really want to remove like weird gaps and lines. And just again refining. But this is what kind of gives us that nice curved soft edges as well as the hard ones. Just removing excess. There we go. Just going in. And I can take my blending brush and just smooth any areas. There we go, cool. Won't do any more than that, otherwise I just erase the work and it becomes purposeless. Try to refrain from using your dry brush as much as you can, at least for this style. And take a little bit. Quite like the kind of red light we're getting, so I'm going to see if I can maintain that somehow. Thinner. Oh, too much. If we use too much thinner, then it becomes like a kind of puddle, and we end up like allowing the oil paint, because of the way it works and the way it kind of moves across the surface, it ends up becoming much more like a wash, a lot easier. So we do want to try and keep it as what's happened? That's weird. I lost my chat. That's weird. We do want to try and keep it as in the correct consistency. So like just enough so that it's, yeah, hard to kind of describe. Similar to what you would get from using an acrylic, but it just basically goes to a wash a lot easier. You can actually see how much longevity I'm getting out of it, just because of just how much sticks around. But obviously if you thin it too much, it just becomes a wash. So just a tiny stipple is enough on the surface there. See if I can get that to line up a bit better. It's a weird angle. It's not exactly in line with where the highlight is. I just need to fix that placement. There we go. And if we go too far, don't worry, because we can always refine it just by using the edges. There we go. So it's just like a lot of back and forth, a lot of adjusting. So tempted to use a dry brush, but that is opposed to the point. And then for under here, because it's reflecting the light, I'm going to do the shadow areas first. This is something I didn't sketch out. It's kind of something I've noticed now that I'm looking at it again. A slightly darker colour. Okay, let's get those volumes in. How do you know where this is going to go? I think you just... Sometimes it's a bit of a guess. You'll kind of understand as you go, like, oh, okay, that looks okay. The most important thing is that like you're developing your understanding like how you build contrast and reflection. So like the light is bouncing down onto the sphere, just make sure it goes off in another direction, but you want there to be some kind of gap to break up your vision. And also it works that it's here, because then when we come to kind of painting in these bolts, you have this really nice contrast with the darkness of the back of those highlights, and then of the shadows, and then the bolts that look bright. In fact, they're kind of popping out even more now, so it works quite well. Now painting this way just keeps the consistency. I think there's a bit of fluff there actually. Let's remove that later. Keeps the consistency quite nice. Oh. Cool. Oh, one sec. Oh, okay. Do you guys have any questions on that? I think I'm probably going to close in a second. But if there's any questions, I've been painting for how long have we been painting now? Let's start at 8:30, so almost 3 hours. So do you guys have any questions of what you'd like to ask on that? Is there anything that kind of sticks out, or does it all make sense? Going to assume there are no questions. Well, that's fine. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'll make a recording of this. I've made one anyway, and then I'll upload it probably tomorrow to give you guys a chance to watch back. And I'll just make a quick edit, just getting out all of the weird bloopers and stuff like that. But thank you so much for tuning in. It's been actually quite fun to talk through this sort of stuff, and in a way, it's actually quite helpful for me to talk as I'm painting. It gets me to think a bit more critically about what I'm doing, so it's actually quite nice to have the opportunity. So thank you so much for tuning in. Actually, I'm going to fix that whilst I'm here. Let's get that rebound light on the leg. There we go. I need to go back in with a shadow. But yeah, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm going to basically continue on probably later on in different areas, but basically doing the same thing with the black on the legs. and then we'll go on to, maybe we can do like the shoulder pads on another day. I'll basically put a message out when we get back to this mini, or we can do the chest, but pretty much that's how you do the black. So I've gone for this like warm brownish red tinted black, and it will all kind of come together once we have the other colours on there. So thanks again, thanks for your patience, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you guys in the next stream, hopefully. Okay, bye bye.